Coming up in the Authorpreneur Podcast. So in February, I finished writing The Locked Room into the Dark, and I'm going to discuss how I achieved this along with the response of my favorite beta reader. I know that sounds pretentious, or I think it does, but I like this beta reader not because they tell me what I want to hear. In the past, they have contributed to the realism of my book, and they've commented on things and they've criticized things that I needed to hear in order to make the book better. Welcome to the Authorpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, mystery author Amelia D. Hay. On this podcast, I will bring you writing, book marketing, and self-publishing advice so that you can create your dream author business, build your author platform, and be creatively independent. You can find the episode show notes and lots more information on the podcast page at authorpreneurpodcast.com/podcast. Hello, writers. My name is Amelia D. Hay, and welcome to the Authorpreneur Podcast. I must admit, I didn't feel like recording an episode today, but I need to get this episode out because on Friday, I should start working with my editor. Well, obviously not straight away. That's when my editor is going to look at The Locked Room. Maybe I will talk about my feelings about this episode. You've seen the title, and I think part of the reason why I didn't want to film this is I'm not sure how I feel about the book that I've just written. And I'm also writing another book currently, Into the Dark, and it's a real struggle. There is a big part of my brain that thinks that because I haven't outlined this book beforehand, I haven't done all the research, I haven't then gone through and slaved over the revisions, that somehow this is a crappy book. And I think that has something to do with it too. And I'm also approaching the time when I need to work with my editor on this. So I think there's a lot of fear that's also helping me put off this episode. Like I should have recorded it last week, but I didn't. And I don't know, I think this is because I've written this book in such a different way, that because I haven't done all of the things like outlining and revisions, which I absolutely hate. Even hate's not quite the word. Like I loathe revision more than anything else in the world. I rather enjoy working with an editor, which is ironic, but I hate revision. And because I haven't done that painful process, because usually with the revisions is where I really start procrastinating, because I do procrastinate when I write the first draft as well, but it's a struggle. And because I haven't struggled in that way, I feel like maybe my book sucks. And I think this is really the real reason why I don't feel like recording this episode. But I've got lots of notes, and I've really tried to look at this from an objective point of view. So in February, I finished writing The Locked Room into the Dark, and I'm going to discuss how I achieved this along with the response of my favorite beta reader. I know that sounds pretentious, or I think it does, but I like this beta reader not because they tell me what I want to hear. In the past, they have contributed to the realism of my book, and they've commented on things and they've criticized things that I needed to hear in order to make the book better. It's not just someone who I let read my book because I need the self-esteem boost as a writer. It's going to sound weird, but as a writer, I need both positive feedback. I need both praise and criticism. So I usually give my work to my alpha reader, which is my mum, for that reason, because I need to feel like I'm not the world's shittiest writer in order to, progress to the next writing phase, which is like working with beta readers and editors and all of that. And I need that before I then go and do that. Anyway, I really like this beta reader because they are quite honest. And I think they deliver their honesty in a way that works for me. I can hear it. Whereas some people they've been quite critical. This beta reader can be quite, maybe snarky isn't the word. They can be quite humorous, like in the comments they leave, and I don't know quite how to explain this, but you know how one person can be quite critical of your work and another person can come along and have the same issue, but deliver it in a way that you can hear it. And this particular reader delivers criticism in a way that I can hear it. I don't feel like I'm walking away with war wounds. I feel like I'm walking away with comments that will help my book be better than what it was when I submitted it. So in that kind of way, that's why they're my favorite beta reader. As you've come to expect, I will share my writing stats, days, time, word count, and the step-by-step process that I used. Now that I've mentioned that, it's critical that I point out that I'm actually following somebody else's method and not my own. This is not something that I've created for myself that I naturally do, obviously, because if you've listened to my podcast for some time, you know that I'm a heavy outliner. So I'm following Dean Wesley Smith's Writing into the Dark method, which he teaches in a course and in a book. I highly recommend that you check out both these options if you're interested in learning how to discovery write. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Throughout this episode, I'll be referencing tools and services that I've used. If you're interested in reading the transcript or would like links to anything that I've mentioned in the show, then check out the very long blog post or edited transcript at authorpreneurpodcast.com/TAP043. And if you're new to this podcast, I want to say a huge thank you for stopping by and trying out my show. To those of you who have been faithfully listening, thank you for regularly listening in and supporting me. Your support means more to me than you know. So in this episode, I'm not just going to talk about how I wrote The Locked Room. I'm going to talk about it in comparison to how I wrote another book that's of a really similar size that I documented, and that is The Candidate. So the reason why I heavily documented how I wrote that book was I was trying something new because I realized I made a mistake in missing that. I wanted to make sure I didn't make again. So I thought if I add this extra step into my writing process, how long is it going to take me to write this novella? Well, I thought it was going to be a short story, but it turned out to be a novella. It's the same situation as this book, but as The Locked Room. So I feel like they're comparable. And this is something that I've done since then. Like, I've heavily documented the rewrite of Duplicity, which is what made me want to try writing into the dark. Like, I never want to do another rewrite again. Like, I completely rewrote that, and I did this to myself because I wanted to change a plot line because I just thought it's not realistic. I didn't like it. And instead of just writing the book again from scratch, I rewrote it, and I sort of feel like that was probably a more painful experience because I was looking at these words going, oh, I wasted these words. And you know what? I didn't. I could have just, rewritten it and it would have been perfectly fine because, when you write, in order to learn how to write, you need to write. And therefore, if you throw an entire manuscript away and rewrite it from scratch, you're not necessarily throwing something away. You've still got the experience of what it was like to write that, and you've learned something writing that. And I think that's just as valuable as pushing out a manuscript. But I want to compare these. So I've got the writing stats for both of them, and I was quite shocked. So before I dive into these statistics for both of these books, here's something you need to know about me and The Locked Room. So I've written 4 screenplays, all in the romantic comedy genre. And I sort of wrote these in 2011 and 2012. And then I tried to turn one of those screenplays into a novel. And I realized, actually, what I did was I wrote one screenplay and then I didn't like it. So I completely discarded it and I rewrote it again from scratch. Same characters, different setting. I think I kept the characters, and these characters in this particular screenplay, became some of the characters that I've used in the James Lalonde. So he actually started out in a romantic comedy screenplay, and then it became, he had a slightly different name. And then that thing became a novel. I did sort of like the novel adaptation because I realized, you know what? I could self-publish. That's when I became aware of self-publishing. And then writing the adaptation, that's when I realized, although I can write a romantic comedy, I can't make a career out of it. Like, it's not something I particularly enjoy. I don't mind reading women's fiction every now and then and a romantic comedy every now and then, but it's not something that I can constantly write over and over and over again. So that's why I stopped screenwriting, amongst other things. So after that, I published 4 stories. So The Lawn, Suspicion, The Candidate, and Duplicity. I also have one long unpublished novel, which I originally thought was going to be the first book in the James Lalonde series, and I actually realized it happens later in the series. So it's actually the first book I've written, and because I wrote this book to an outline and I wrote a really rough draft, I have to go and revise that, knowing what I know now. And there was lots of things I didn't know. So that book is just, it's going to be a struggle. I'm not looking forward to that one. And all of these works together, those 4 screenplays, I think they were one of those screenplays I haven't counted in the total words that I've written, because I think I lost it. I had a external hard drive fail and I lost the screenplay. So I didn't count it. So I think only 3 of those screenplays are actually counted in the total word count. So far I've written 379,000 words of fiction. That's including the long manuscript. And on top of this, I regularly do courses on story structure and writing craft. So that's what you, I guess, need to know about, I guess, my writing journey. And the only reason why I know that I've written 379,000 words is I've tracked these words in an Excel spreadsheet. I know I've got a problem. So here's what you need to know about The Locked Room. So it's a single point of view story. It's a simple timeline. It doesn't jump between time periods. There's no flashbacks. It's also an amateur sleuth murder mystery. And I'm aware of the genre and its tropes because I've written 5 sort of amateur sleuth mysteries, and I've become aware of the sort of genre tropes and what the readers expect and what separates an amateur sleuth murder mystery just from like a detective fiction and all those other subgenres and suspense. Also, the book, as you can probably tell by the title, it has a locked room trope. So it's a closed setting with a small cast of characters. So now for the writing stats. So the first draft, I do want to say, so as I was writing the second James Lalonde book, which is Duplicity, I briefly mentioned that James had previously gone to the opening of Professor Xavier Watson's bed and breakfast, and that he solved a murder there. So that little Easter egg already is what is the idea that I had before I wrote this. So I already knew it was going to be a locked room, but I didn't realize at the time, the penny hadn't dropped for me that this is going to be a locked room mystery. But the idea was there, but that's all it was. It was just Professor Xavier Watson, his wife, and someone was murdered, and James solved it. That's all I knew before going into this. With the first draft, that took 89 hours and 9 minutes, and I completed that over 22 days, and the final word count at that time was 26,201 words. And I'm going to explain exactly how I got to those 26,201 words. After this, I did a grammar and spelling edit. And that took 9 hours and 37 minutes, and I did that across 2 days. And the new word count, so that grammar and spelling edit, I guess it's more of I did my own line edit, and I paid attention to the words, and I used Natural Reader to read back the the story to me, and I listened to, and obviously I was listening to how the story sounded and it was more how the words sounded together. And if for some reason for me, it's easy using natural reader is an easy way for me to hear those clunky sentences. So that's really what that kind of edit is. I don't know what to call it other than to call it like a grammar and spelling edit, or maybe I should call it a natural reader edit because that's essentially what it is. I did this over 2 days because I wanted to get it over and done with, and I didn't want to lose momentum here. So I've called that my second draft. And by the way, in the show notes, I will share links to Dean Wesley Smith's course and his book. So instead of just listening to me talk about it, you can sort of go through the course. I think the course is $180. I think that's including taxes. And I definitely think it's definitely a course that was worth doing. I'll just check that price actually, because I feel like I've just advertised that and probably not be nice to check if it's true. Yeah, so I think it's 180. It's $180 including taxes. I have a funny feeling I did buy it on sale, and I'm not sure if he's doing the sales anymore. Because I think he was doing sales because of a certain world event that'll probably be not that I'm monetized or anything on YouTube, but I'm pretty sure they'll penalize me if I mention it. So I ended up removing 443 words from the grammar and spelling draft off the locked room, and that brought the word count down to 57, not 57. Why am I can't read apparently. This isn't good news. So 25,758 words, the new word count. Then I submitted the book so after that grammar and spelling edit, that's when I sent it to my alpha reader. And then after that, I sent it to I did the beta reader edit. So I submitted it to my beta reader. I actually paid this beta reader on Fiverr, and I got the report back as well as inline comments. I have to admit, I'm quite picky in the type of feedback I want from beta readers. I've had people sort of say to me, "Oh, there's no social media in this book," or I've had comments like that, and I don't feel like they're helpful. What I want someone to help me fix the story that's there, not to add their own ideas to it, but to help me perfect what I've written. That's the point of getting beta readers, is not that they add to the story, it's to help you fix the story that's there. So I feel like that's also what this particular person does, and I think they recognize that this is their job, and I think it just works. So after the beta reader edit, after I got that feedback from the beta reader, I then spent 3 hours and 2 minutes. That's including going over what they've said and then making those corrections in the manuscript, and I did this in 1 day. And I ended up adding an extra 413 words to the manuscript, and this brought the word count up to 26,171 words. As you can sort of guess, I didn't write every day during this time period. In February, when I was really pushing myself, the end of January and February, and I was pushing myself to finish this book, I wrote a few days a week, not every day. Because of the way you write into the dark, I think this is also a me issue as well. When I write, I know writing is a cerebral experience, but I am quite a big thinker in terms of it's a part of the writing process for me. And when you're spending time, thinking about something, it just looks like I'm staring at the ceiling, basically. It's just like, and this is part of the process for me. And, mouth hacking open. I mean, it's why I can't write when my husband's here, 'cause I've got an audience. And I think because of that makes that extends the writing period for me. But not everyone, I know not everyone is like that, but I am. So in total, I spent 101 hours and 48 minutes across 25 days writing this story to a point where I've handed it to my editor. And I've included the cover design in this. I think I've included the cover design as a part of the first draft because I did it in between writing sessions on a particular day. Or maybe I wrote and then I included because even though I had the cover, I made changes to the cover. So it looked different from what I had put on the website. Actually, there was a reason why I did that, actually. I had to change the cover because the color palette was similar to another cover that I already have in my series. So I was like, yeah, I need to change this. Now that we've talked about how long, like, the writing stats for me writing The Locked Room, what was it like for me to write The Candidate? So the outlining took 15 days, and that took 37 hours and 30 minutes. And obviously there's no word count for that. So the first draft took 16 days, and that took 50 hours and 58 minutes, and the word count at the end of that was 25,747 words. So the reason why the outline took 15 days is I went through that outline and I edited that. So that outlining includes editing of that outline in the story. Just so I wanted to sort of get to a place where I felt like there was no plot holes in the story before I went and wrote the first draft. So then I did the first round of revisions, and that took me 4 days. And that took 13 hours and 30 minutes. And the word count at the end of that was 25,976 words. I also, as a part of this revision, I went through and I made sure that all the story questions were answered. And then after I did that, and I found out that there were things I left out, so I added those in and I did a line edit. And then I submitted it to my alpha reader and beta reader. And then I did revisions based on that. And that took me 5 days. And that took me 14 hours and 30 minutes. So the word count after that ended up being 26,439 words. So the total time I spent writing The Candidate was actually 116 hours and 48 minutes across 40 days. So where did I save time in my writing? And I know this is it's a weird thing to sort of consider. I saved 15 hours by writing into the dark. And the revisions I did based on beta reader feedback were significantly less as well. Like when you compare it, it's with The Locked Room, I did 3 hours and 2 minutes, whereas with The Candidate, it was 5 days. I spent 5 days doing the revisions, and it was 14 hours and 30 minutes. I still put it through Natural Reader after I made the changes. So I think that's where I saved the most time, is in these places. Other than stats, what was different about these two writing experiences? Writing The Locked Room was an enjoyable experience, and I legitimately enjoyed it. This is the first time I've enjoyed writing in a long time. While my writing was broken up between a 6-week trip to Australia and a trip to France to visit my in-laws, I looked forward to getting back into writing. It was almost as if I had returned to those days when I was screenwriting after work and over the weekend, and I really enjoyed that. And I think part of the reason why I enjoyed that is I had no idea what lay ahead of me. Like, I hadn't pressed publish, I hadn't gotten the feedback, I hadn't built in that fear that I do have when I publish. Whereas while writing the Candidate, I enjoyed outlining and the character creation, the research phases. The first draft and the revisions were difficult, and I hated this part of the process. I had to bribe myself to get into the writing chair. And one of the ways I did that is I started documenting me writing The Candidate, and I published it on YouTube. That was a big driver for me to get the shit done, because no one was watching, but people could watch. as I was writing the candidate, writing had become a job and there was no joy left. I didn't write every day. I did struggle with my mental health as I wrote the candidate, which resulted in long gaps between writing sessions, but the lack of joy was definitely experienced in the first draft and the revisions. For me, this is the biggest difference. The locked room and writing into the dark helped me love writing again. And I do think I even as I'm writing book 3, I am sort of struggling a little bit with my mental health, but I'm also having other issues as well, and that are related to the book. I feel sort of stuck, and I'm sure I'll figure it out. So, how did I write the locked room into the dark? This is, I guess, the big question, right? So, my method is Dean Wesley Smith's Writing into the Dark method that he teaches in both of his course and his book, and I highly recommend both of these to you. As I sort of shared earlier, so I started with the concept of the locked room, where James Lalonde was at an event that was referenced in Duplicity. So it was a murder at a bed and breakfast run by Professor Xavier Watson and his wife. Flora is mentioned by name in the Duplicity, but she's not in the book because I mentioned her in the context of the bed and breakfast. I guess one of the biggest things I did with the locked room is I filtered everything through the point of view character. So setting, description, and events were filtered through James's opinion, and nothing exists outside of that. And I think that helped. And between these books, I also learnt about writing with depth, which I also learnt from Dean Wesley Smith as well. So I started writing in the description of the setting, which is filtered through the point of view character. So again, it's like opinion on setting. It's like if I describe how something smells, it's not actually how it smells, but what the experience. It's more about the experience that the smell triggers for the point of view character. And I let the story evolve from here, and I think it's a much easier way to write, for me at least. At the end of each scene, I added the details of the scene into an outline spreadsheet. So again, scene number, character, point of view character, scene goal, scene type. Eventually, I sort of got a feel for this is actually this plot point in the story, what actually happens in the scene, any scene blocking notes. So basically, I guess scene blocking is probably not a good term for this because I've sort of changed it, but I put in the beats of the scene, like those emotional moments or the sort of critical moments of the scene. I then do the value shifts, conflict, stakes, cliffhanger, story question, timeline, information, and foreshadowing and other notes, just so I can sort of see the story. This outlining method is mine. It's not what Dean Wesley Smith does. He just writes plot notes, whereas this is something I do. And I sort of merged what I do and what he does together. I'm not sure if it's necessary, but I'm going to keep doing this. And obviously, how I write into the dark will evolve over time. So I'm not going to change anything just now. So I also create character profiles as I go so I can keep things consistent, and I do this in Scrivener. I do think my outlining technique does add extra time to the writing process, but I think in all honesty, it takes me about 10 minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to write all that information down because I've pulled it from the scene I've just written. So I'm sort of outlining as I go along. Then I cycle through what I've just written. I add more depth to the story. And this is adding more details, not line editing or correcting spelling and grammar. I'm sort of contributing more to the story. And then I write the next scene. So I write the first scene, do the outline. I reread that. I cycle through it. I make revisions. Then I write the next scene. And then I add the new scene to the outline. And I sort of repeat this cycling. So as I cycle through the scenes, I use the revision feature in Scrivener. So you can see what I've actually added. And then I click back to normal mode when I'm writing. So in Scrivener, you got two different colored text. You got the red text, which is stuff I've added, and then you've got just like the default colored text, which is like a black color. It's like it's not quite black, but well, maybe it is actually. It's a true black. Not that that's important. All research is done as the need has arisen. Nothing was left to fix later. Dean does call this lazy writing, and what sucks about it is he's kind of right. It's because I've done this. His reasoning behind, not being lazy and doing research as you need it is because the research will often give you ideas that will help you to keep writing the story. Obviously, I keep this cycling experience as I sort of reach the end of the book. I will say, I think I got to the midpoint and I stopped cycling completely through the story. But the midpoint was, I think 12,000 words. I think I did this because, I don't know, I was worried. And I think this is why this took so long as well, is that I was doing all that cycling and it does take some time. But I felt like it's something I needed to do. But realistically, what I should have done is I should have cycled through after every scene and only cycled back 2,000 words. But I didn't do that. And I have no regrets either. And if I was stuck and didn't know what to write, I gave myself time to think. I read a book, I watched a true crime podcast episode, or I took a short break, but in the end, I just asked myself, what would James do next? Because that's essentially what a book is, right? It's a series of decisions made by a character that makes up a story. Where I'm stuck in book 3 at the moment it's something slightly different. Like, I've convinced myself I need to see something in order to write it, and that's probably not necessarily true. So just before I went and wrote the last scene, I went back and I added more depth into the moments where I was telling something instead of showing the events taking place. And then I went back and I wrote the last scene of the book, which I think is an epilogue. I can't remember. It's been a while. The interesting thing about this is usually when I write a murder mystery, I know everything. I know the clues. With this, I knew nothing. So I didn't know who the killer was until the very end. I had theories, but I didn't know until James was faced with a gun, and then I revealed who was behind that gun. Because in the scene, I made him focus on the gun being pulled on him, because I'm assuming, not that this has happened to me, that it's quite a startling experience. So I focused on that, and then the person started talking, and it sort of spilled from there. And it turns out that as I was writing, I had a few theories on who it could be. I also, as a part of the Writing into the Dark experience, I also spent a lot of time listening to my story being read back to me using natural readers. And I think this helped with the cycling and me listening to the story and sort of thinking, okay, what's missing from this? Then I performed as a part of the cycling as well. If I added something in a scene that, like, say, the gun I put in the scene because I think something needs to happen now. I decided something needs to happen in every scene. And I was writing this scene and I was like, I need something dramatic. So I thought, I'm going to throw in a gun here. And I threw in the gun. And I think I added in a cat. I think that was the writing prompt for the locked room mystery. So I thought, I went back and added in a cat. So I was adding more depth to the previous scenes. I was setting up moments later in the story where I realized, she needs to go back here and this needs to happen, or this subtle clue needs to sort of be placed here. So you're able to so when you look back and you see, you can sort of see the clues subtly sprinkled throughout the story. So I went and did a lot of those type of edits as well. So after I finished writing, I then performed the line edit with Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, so the story was readable for my beta reader. And again, I listened to Natural Reader after I did this edit just to double check that the story sounded the way I wanted it to sound. And then I wrote the book description, Then I hired the beta reader on Fiverr. So this book description was actually the writing of the book description was a part of was included with that Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid draft. So what was the experience like compared to outlining? After I finished the locked room and performed the line edits, I struggled with it because I felt like I had to keep revising. What I didn't realize at the time was there was only a 15-hour difference between the two methods. I just didn't notice the time had flown by. And I legitimately enjoyed the writing experience to the point where I thought this can't be right and the story must be terrible. So I have a few mindset issues I need to work on. Obviously, based on my beta reader's reaction, I've come to realize actually this isn't the worst book I've ever written. And that is super dramatic. The other thing is I put this book through Autocrit and Marlowe. So they're both AI editing tools and they both give the book a rating in comparison to other books that have been published. So with Marlowe, that's on the authors.ai website I created, which was Authors AI is created by the authors of the bestseller code. And interestingly enough, I discovered that the pacing of the story was in line with bestsellers in my genre. So I was like, oh, that was a bit of a surprise because I thought the pacing of this is going to be like next level terrible. Obviously, I have a lot of faith in myself. And in Autocrit, I got a score of 88 out of 100 compared to other books in my genre. So I went in and I put in the edited version of Suspicion into Autocrit, not the... Yeah, this is the version of the book that was published. So I got 90.8 for that. And again, both of those books have a really comparable score for pacing, even though Suspicion is close to like 45,000 words and The Locked Room is 26-ish thousand words. The pacing score was still the overall score for the book was quite comparable, and the pacing of both of these books was quite great. Yeah, so the pacing and momentum for Suspicion got 89.6 out of 100. And the pacing and momentum for The Locked Room is 80.5. And you'll see why this one gets 80.5 when you hear, because I'm about to read you the feedback I got from my beta reader. Yeah, so I'm going to show you the feedback I got from my beta reader. Well, I'm not going to show it to you. I'm going to read it to you. I've just pulled a piece, I think the opening paragraph of the report, and then I'm going to do like a super brief summary. So this is what my beta reader said. I feel like each time I write one of these reports about a James Lalonde story, I always start off saying, this is my favorite one so far. But in a lot of ways, I think that might be true for this one too. Starting with pacing, I thought it was excellent throughout, and I didn't deliberately set this up. So that sort of blows my theory about outlining out the window, which is a bit, because there's a part of me that really loves outlining. We get to the murder relatively quickly, and pretty much every second up to that point is used to assemble the main cast and setting the stage in a way that makes all of them seem rather suspicious and like they all have something they're hiding. In the overall scope, the story read very briskly and I sailed along through it. I definitely felt like the pacing in this story made it a real page turner. So this is how he opened the report, which is like a summary of what he thought. And so basically there were no issues with undeveloped characters or motives, and there were no plot holes. So it turns out my subconscious mind can actually tell a better story than what I can plot out in an outline. So now for the $1 million question, do I regret not trying this earlier? The short answer is no. Now was definitely the right time for me to start writing into the dark. After revising Missing and the now third edition, which is titled Suspicion, and making substantial rewrites to Duplicity, I was ready to let go of outlining. But outlining 5 stories and 4 screenplays, as well as transitioning from screenwriting to novel writing, has taught me 3-act structure. And that was a necessary part of my journey. I'm not saying that I know everything. In fact, I'm still learning the craft of storytelling, and I suspect I always will be. But I didn't just discovery write my first book. I took a journey to get there, and I don't regret that journey for a second. I feel like this is just the right time for me to start trying to write in a new way and seeing if it works for me. Yeah, so I don't recommend writing into the dark to a new writer, especially if you don't know anything, you haven't learned outlining, you haven't read a lot of books. If you're just new, I do think at least plotting out the major plot points of your story before you start is a good way to go. And then once you get a few books under your belt, you might want to consider trying discovery writing. Or if you naturally do just want to discovery write and you can't bring yourself to outline, then do that. But if you naturally want to outline, then I suggest that that's what you do until you have enough experience and you've learnt a few things about writing. And you really only learn about writing by writing and publishing. It's definitely, I think, the biggest thing that I've learnt so far is that pressing that publish button is a huge learning curve. Comes with a huge learning curve, and it's not getting all the pieces of the puzzle right. It's what happens after that. It's getting your first few sales or free downloads or whatever, and sort of seeing feedback from readers. It's all a part of the process, and writing your next book and trying to write your next book better. That didn't make grammatical sense, but I'm going to move on. And that's the point really that I want to achieve with my writing, is that my next book is better than my last. And that's really all I want from my writing at this stage. So I think anything else is just unrealistic. So that's all the things I can discuss in terms of my experiments with writing into the dark. Later on, after I receive feedback from my editor, I will share their thoughts with you as well, in a similar way that maybe I won't share them sort of directly, but I will talk about the kind of feedback that I got with The Locked Room in comparison to the feedback I've got with the books that I've outlined, just to see if it's any different. Now I have an important question to ask you. Have you considered writing into the dark or discovery writing? Or do you discovery write your stories? Come on over to the blog post and share your thoughts and experiences in the comments section. Thank you for watching, and happy reading and writing, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Authorpreneur Podcast. If you love this episode, then hit the subscribe button and leave a review on your favourite podcasting app. I'm your host, Amelia D. Hay, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.